So why don't you walk us through what you were asked to, or what you're going to present here in your presentation?
So I'm not going to talk about the social science literature just because Dr. Riva is going to do that. But primarily we'll focus on the extent and nature of the coverage in this case. And this isn't a change of venue study, so it's really focusing on what coverage has come out of these hearings, more of from the video streaming and video cameras in the courtroom. So not looking at an analysis of the prejudicial nature of the coverage per se, like we would in a change of venue survey. And then the second part is the survey that was done to see what impact this has had on the jury pool. Are people following it? What are they seeing? And what impressions they have at this point. So I would consider this like the baseline. This is the floor of where we're at right now, and we'll see what happens moving forward. And then the last section, if we have time, talks about some of the challenges cases like this pose when you're trying to pick a jury in a community like this.
Great. So you said on the first area, the social science literature, that's something Dr. Ruva's going to talk about, but did you have one key point you wanted to make there?
The only thing I want to say about it, because we'll touch on it when we get into the media coverage, is, there's a lot of research on this, and the main takeaway I want to talk about is the types of pretrial publicity that are most prejudicial is emotional pretrial publicity and pretrial publicity around the character of the defendant. So all I'm going to say is because it'll come up later.
Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead
Okay.
to the extent of the coverage, and has the coverage impacted the jury pool?
Right, okay. So again, this is just looking at two things. Where are we at today in terms of the extent and nature of some of the coverage, focusing on the question of whether or not having cameras in the courtroom is potentially prejudicial, and if it's creating sensational content, or is it more of a neutral nature that, people watching live streams and things like that? And then what impact has this coverage had so far on the jury pool?
And question 2 is answered by your survey?
By telephone survey, yes.
All right, so let's take a look at the first area, the media coverage.
Okay, so I just wanted to touch on the extent of the coverage. So the data here come from two different sources. The first source is called Newsbank, and that's an archive of newspaper coverage. So when it's looking at the coverage in the state of Utah, there's 831 articles in that Newsbank that are sources that are based in the state. And it's probably a conservative number because it's not exhaustive. There's things that are missed. But I'd rather be conservative than overly inclusive.
Right.
And then Utah County, 697, and I believe it looked at like 15 sources primarily, of 15 newspapers. It also includes Fox KSTU, the local Fox station, and there's 209 news segments that are in that archive. The last section there, that row, is from a Lexis search, which is different, and it captures transcripts. So there's 441 of those that are nationwide, but it is limited. So it doesn't include Fox News, it doesn't include, I think, MSNBC, NBC, so it's not an exhaustive list. It's only certain.
I'm sorry, to include
networks.
CNN, the major
It has
networks?
CNN, I think it has CBS, NBC, or maybe ABC or something like that, but it's missing some of the networks.
And I told the court that on his thumb drive, or on his drive that we provided, was the 441 transcripts,
Okay.
6,000 pages.
Yeah, that's right.
You've seen that?
I have seen that.
Okay. Next, I think you're going to look at the nature of the media coverage, and what was the framework you used to do that?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to touch on is, this is the American Bar Association rule, so 3.6 about pretrial publicity. It's not the rule, whatever the Utah one, this is just the ABA. And the thing that stood out to me initially is, when we talk about people who work in, attorneys, people involved in the case, like what they should and shouldn't introduce to the public. And one of those things that are key factors to me are extrajudicial statements that the lawyer knows or reasonably should know, will be disseminated by means of public communications and have a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing the adjudicative proceeding in the matter. So anything that's particularly prejudicial in nature, you shouldn't be releasing if you know it's going to lead to bias. Examples when we talk about the defendant, when I mentioned defendant character evidence is particularly prejudicial, we have character, credibility, reputation, or criminal record. And then tests and things like confessions, admissions, statements given by a defendant. When we talk about tests, it could be DNA, ballistics, things like that. And then opinions as to the guilt or innocence of the defendant. And then anything they know might be admissible. So this is the stuff I look at Are things crossing that line? Because those things are particularly prejudicial, and I think the ABA, a lot of that is driven by the research that tells us that.
Okay. We're on slide 14. What does this show us?
So the reason I point this out is because a lot of the prejudicial content that's come out so far that you see in the media and keeps being reproduced on social media, in television newscasts, is what was initially released in this press conference. So, it was the, I guess the indictment or arrest affidavit, and there's a lot of prejudicial details that are distributed in there where it's, a very long press conference. We're literally reading text messages from the defendant to his roommate, and they're prejudicial. They imply there's some degree of guilt in there, and it's reading it, the whole thing, which is then disseminated, and it gets reproduced on TV and reproduced again and again and again. It appears in social media posts, reels on YouTube, and a host of other places.
And does that reproduction include when the coverage relates to in-court appearances?
It does. So, we'll get to that, but the information that was here keeps getting reproduced in a sensational way on TV. And not only that, like here, he's reading it, but when you see it in the graphics, it shows text message that implies this is the actual text message on a phone that came from the defendant, and it's not. So it's very prejudicial and misleading.
So you say on your slide, this serves as sort of a megaphone and a distributor of certain information.
Yes, and
that
the
is within
interesting-
the categories you set out.
Yes, and when it's being distributed, just to point out, it's not like it's only distributed on conservative media outlets like Fox. It's on CNN, NBC, all of the networks. So it's widely being distributed to all types of viewers.
And in terms of other sources of this megaphone effect, your next, and by the way, you've got the actual video of the press conference.
Yeah,
or
this
the
is a
parts
clip of it.
We're not going to play that
Yeah.
because of time limitations, but it's
Right.
there if the court wants to look at it. Are there other sort of megaphone factors here?
Yeah, so this is a unique factor in this case, in the sense that people who are very influential, obviously the President of the United States, or former Attorney General, these are people that have a lot of influence and power, perceived credibility, and they're making strong prejudicial, inflammatory statements, and I think that's unique. I don't usually see that in cases, and calling for the public execution of the defendant before there's been a trial, things like that are unique in nature.
Right, Your Honor, this is one of the slides I would like the court to see, and it's, as he just indicated, expressing opinions, strong opinions about whether Mr. Robinson should be executed. So the court wants to take it in public, that's fine, but for the record, I'm asking the court not to do that. I do think it's important that the court hear this, just the tone of it and the substance, I think, is very important for the court to consider. Since we are submitting it, the PowerPoint is on the drive, the court could listen to it outside of the public domain, however the court wants to proceed.
So I'll make note of that, and I'm happy to review that in its
Thank you.
entirety.
If we're not going to play, just one thing that's unique about it, if we're not playing it, is
Sure.
there's inflammatory language in there that also creates in-group, out-group identification, when I think.
Could you explain that?
Yeah, so it's like a lot of people identify with a political side, unfortunately. I'm a member of the Democratic Party or Republican Party. I'm liberal, I'm conservative. So I think there's some language in that clip where it mentions, I don't remember the exact phrase, but something about like lunatic leftists or something like that that are doing this. So it creates this, the out-group is dangerous, they're lunatics, maniacs, or whatever phrase was used, which creates more of danger, the perception that members of that group, that out-group, are dangerous, and there's a danger there. So that's something that comes up later as well.
And how is that kind of information more or less prejudicial?
Well, it creates, again, in-group, out-group identification, and we think members of the out-group are not like us. They tend to, they're all the same. We attribute stereotypes that of how those people behave. They're more likely to impact how we see them. You're less likely to have empathy for members of the outgroup when group salience is high. Versus members of our group we see as individuals, we're complex, less likely to be impacted by stereotypes, more likely to empathize with them, identify with them, things like that.
All right. Now, did you actually take a look at the court appearances that have so far taken place in this case to see what was discussed so that you could compare what was happening in court with what the electronic media was reporting was happening?
In terms of the comparison of what's happening and what's being produced? in the
Yes.
media? Yeah, I did look at that.
So the timeline, could you explain this, what you have up here?
Sure. So this is just a timeline of the hearings that have taken place and like high level what they were. So like the initial WebEx appearance, pretty brief, and you would think that's a pretty neutral, not very significant hearing, and you would expect if you're looking at the media, it should be neutral. It shouldn't be highly prejudicial, inflammatory, since very little happened there, right? And the same thing when you have like the waiver hearing, appointment of counsel. There's not a lot of fireworks. It's not the preliminary hearing. No evidence is being laid out or anything like that. So you would expect the media not to be introducing prejudicial content, given the nature of those particular hearings.
If they were serving an educational function?
If they were educational, transparent, a summary of what occurred, these are very procedural, technical things. They're not necessarily sensational in any way.
So did you take a look at the first hearing, the initial WebEx appearance by Mr. Robinson?
Right, so this is a brief, short hearing, where, I think he appeared on WebEx, right? And then I looked primarily at what did that elicit? What was the reaction to the media? Was it kind of just summarizing this is what happened, or was it more sensational in nature?
Okay, so let's take a look at the clip. And this is from NBC
You
News.
have been watching that court
on that
hearing
date,
for the
correct?
man suspected of shooting and killing Charlie Kirk last week on a campus in Utah. You saw the suspected assassin, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson there, not speak.
I think we got a problem with the audio.
To thank all parties for being here, and this concludes to thank all parties for being here.
Do I need to? Let me check and see. That's in settings.
Is this source, yeah, the volume for the source might allow for amplified volume.
Yeah, right, okay. That's what, all right. Let me unplug this and replug it, that's the way it happened last time. Speaker. It's not coming up. By the laptop. Okay, we can do that. Okay. Okay, so is this first slide from, it's not in that? All right, let's try that out.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, let me escape. Slide. Okay,
Did you skip the previous,
yeah, let me go back.
19? There you go.
There we go. So is this, as you indicate on the slide here, this is ABC's coverage of the September 16th, 2025 WebEx appearance?
Yes.
And in this clip, are you picking up the coverage right after the court says we're in recess?
Yes.
Okay. it's not. Getting no audio at all.
Want to try a different laptop?
I'd have you reboot that laptop first before you try a different one.
And we, I'm sorry.
I'd recommend rebooting the laptop.
Okay. Try that. Apologies to the court. Thought we had this set up. Let's do. I've rebooted.
Pull the cable out one more time, and then plug it back.
Say again?
Pull that HDMI cable out now that you've rebooted it. And plug it back in.
Okay. That work?
There we go.
There we go. Okay. Yes. I think we're good. Okay. My apologies. So you're picking this up from the point in time right after they've shown the whole hearing?
Yes.
And this is kind of the aftermath?
Right.
You have been watching that court hearing for the man suspected of shooting and killing Charlie Kirk last week on a campus in Utah. You saw the suspected assassin, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson there, not speaking, wearing what appeared to be some kind of green vest, as the judge read out the 7 charges against him, including, of course, aggravated murder. The state making clear that they are seeking the death penalty and putting in place, the judge did, a protective order, apparently at the request of the state, for Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk's widow. I want to bring in Danny Savalos. I want to bring back Steve Patterson, who's live for us in Utah. Danny, here too, some of the paperwork is just into us on that protective order that the court finds the defendant represents a credible threat to the physical safety of that person here being Erica Kirk. Danny, stand by for a second. I want to go back to Steve Patterson here. And Steve, it has been a remarkable series of developments over the course of the last several hours as state officials, the Utah attorney there earlier in the day described, and the charging documents, some of these probable cause documents showed step by step, almost minute by minute in some instances, how they closed in on this 22-year-old as their suspect.
They did, and in doing so, we got the TikTok, we got the charges, also these, the exchange of text messages between Robinson and his roommate. These are details that we simply didn't have before. One thing that sort of gels with what we saw in the text messages, this exchange again before and after between Robinson and a roommate who believed to be romantically linked, is how cognizant and lucid Robinson appears. And I would say that for looking at this video, although unblinking, so unblinking and eerily at times, that it almost appears like the video is frozen. Just want to comment a little bit more on the physical appearance of Robinson, appearing over WebEx on video. Appears to be wearing what is described to me as a safety smock. We know he's on a special hold, right? They're going to hold him there in a separate unit before they evaluate his mental health, before they put him in maybe a more different location, a more general location. They do that as a matter of procedure, right? But it is sort of interesting. He did say one thing, which was his name, which was stated clearly and firmly. And again, I want to say gels with sort of what we saw in that exchange of text messages, because he's talking to his roommate who clearly appears to have no idea, the roommate, what is going on or that he is the suspected shooter. And yet he's sort of talking a TikTok of what he has done and why he's done it and admitting to do it, essentially shocking this roommate through these series of exchanges, which sort of gels with his physical appearance today. Obviously, we also heard during the hearing the Utah County following the course of action to introduce the death penalty as well. That was filed as this was being read in court. So definitely some developments here today. And just the amount of information that we got, the blanks that were filled in.
That's right.
Not only that, but also on the apprehension, the involvement of the mother as well, and sort of bringing him in. And also the physical evidence, the DNA found on the actual trigger of the rifle, which was tied to not only what was found on the screwdriver, but also the towel used to wrap the rifle. So an extraordinary amount of information that we got, especially with this charging document that's now in.
What's also clear from these text exchanges laid out, Steve, is that Robinson had no intention of being caught. And I say that because he said he had hoped to die of old age with this being his secret, according to what the state had laid out in this text exchange. Almost seemed panicked when describing trying to go back to return to retrieve the rifle that he allegedly shot Charlie Kirk with, not being able to do so when essentially caught out by his parents, when his parents approached him and said, we think this may have been you, tried to get in touch with him, tried to reach out. The state says that Robinson suggested or implied that he may try to take his own life here. So you can get a sense of his mindset, at least based on some of these text exchanges and what law enforcement has laid out over the course of some of these documents here. All of it, as we should note, these are the state charges here. It's possible federal charges could come.
Yeah, federal charges possible. One notable sort of omission is we didn't see any federal officials. We don't know if federal charges will be filed, although it's heavily implied that they will. One thing also is sort of the level of deceit, both with the parents. The father did something that sounded very clever. It was heard the description of the rifle that had been described by authorities, federal authorities, state authorities, and that he assumed, obviously with the pictures of Robinson himself on camera at the university, assuming this is his son, try to get in contact with his son, trying to ask, hey, could you send me a picture of the rifle that I gave you? And of course, the son sort of ghosting him, seeming to imply, again, involvement. And also about the rifle, there was a lot of investigative work to try to figure out, was the rifle traceable? Was it bought legally, illegally? Would have been hard to trace, we now know, because this was essentially a family heirloom, something that's common in hunting families, passed down from grandfather to son, and that was the case here. So again, much more stark relief that we're seeing this case in, Hallie.
That's right. Robinson also telling his mother he had been out sick, had stayed home sick over the course of the 2 days that she had inquired about. Steve, I know you're going to stand by for us later on as we get potentially more on this. Danielle, let me go back to you here briefly, because Steve laid out what could come next here. Obviously, the death penalty that the state is seeking. What about this protective order for Erica Kirk? Is that something that is typical in the course of an investigation like this, a prosecution like this?
Sure, yes. As to prospective victims, it's usually not entered against someone's spouse, but it makes sense here because this is not some street crime or a crime of passion. This is someone who was apparently, whether by this defendant or not, targeted, and so it makes sense to say, well, close members of the family may also be targeted as well. So it's not unusual for judges to enter those kinds of protective orders as sua sponte on their own or in response to a request from the prosecution.
Danny Savalos, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. We have been talking now about the developing news that has occurred over the course of the last several hours, with prosecutors laying out in detail how they say Tyler Robinson carried out this murder. We're going to play a big portion of that in case you missed it earlier. We want to basically roll that tape so you can hear for yourself how the state laid this out. Take a listen.
These are the allegations.
And let me stop it right here. At this point, does she play essentially the entire press conference by Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Okay. And we didn't include the entire 27, 30, or 45 minutes, right? We clipped it to get to the end of the coverage.
On September 10th, 2025, at approximately 12:23 p.m., Charlie Kirk was shot and killed while speaking to a large crowd on the campus of Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah. Police found the suspected murder weapon, a bolt-action .30-06 rifle, nearby. Over the next approximately 33 hours, police conducted a manhunt for the shooter until the evening of September 11th, 2025, when Tyler James Robinson surrendered to police at the Washington County Sheriff's Office.
You have been listening to Jeff Gray, the Utah County Attorney, earlier laying out those minute-by-minute details on how they caught the man accused of assassinating Charlie Kirk. You saw the court hearing for suspect Tyler Robinson live before that. That was that virtual hearing. As prosecutors say, they will seek the death penalty. Robinson will remain in jail, no possibility of bail. He'll be in court again in just about 2 weeks.
And again, just to reiterate, we cut 27 minutes out of the press conference, right?
Yes.
So how does this coverage line up with what was happening in court?
Well, I think, like we said, there's an implication that there was, like, the text messages were part of the court hearings, because he implies that was part of the hearing. And then it's bringing up all of this new information or old information that has nothing to do with the hearing. So it's just rehashing. Let's remind you about the text messages, DNA, the deceit of the dad because he was suspicious of him in terms of the gun, and all of these things have nothing to do with this hearing.
I noticed the reporter, when he put that graphic up of the text, by the way, was that graphic the actual phone of Mr. Robinson?
It's not. No, and it implies, and you see that throughout a lot of the coverage, like text messages. There's YouTube reels where somebody like creates a reel and reproduces text messaging so it looks like it's the real text message.
And when he's putting that up there, he says, as we heard in the hearing, words to that effect.
Yes.
But there was no mention in the hearing of text messages or anything else, was there?
Correct.
Is he confusing what he heard in the press conference with what he thought he heard in the hearing?
Well, I think he's confusing the viewers with what happened in terms of now that, there's a belief like evidence is being presented in these hearings that imply guilt when that's just not the case.
So as you say in your slide, is this coverage sort of advancing the prosecution narrative as opposed to an educational function?
Yes.
All right. Did you also take a look at ABC's coverage?
Yes.
And by the way, the last slide was, I think, the longest slide, right?
I think so.
All right. So this is the same day.
To thank all parties for being here, and this concludes this hearing at this time. Court is in recess.
So the suspected shooter there of Charlie Kirk, the hearing has now just concluded. We know that the state is pursuing the death penalty here. We have just learned throughout this proceeding that they are going to try to find him counsel. They deemed he is indigent, so they will be providing an attorney for the alleged shooter, and the next time that he will make a court appearance will be September 29th. And then again, as you heard the judge there say, that will happen on WebEx. A couple other things that we learned here throughout this quick hearing is that he will remain in custody without bail, and that the state was also present there, and they asked for a protective order on behalf of Erica Kirk. Of course, that is Charlie Kirk's wife. A reminder to everybody that, yes, he was a conservative activist, but he was also a young husband and a young father of 2 children, and a protective order has been granted on behalf of Erica Kirk. I do want to bring in our ABC News Chief National Correspondent, Matt Gutman. He's in Spanish Fork, Utah, there for us. Matt, thank you here for being here with us. And so we just saw this proceeding play out. No surprise, right? This is not the proceeding in which this person would enter a plea. But Matt, prior to this, there was a lot of evidence that the prosecution sort of laid out for the public, including text messages, DNA, things like that, that they do plan to try to present to the judge to be admitted here in trial. But perhaps, Matt, you can just gauge for us, since you've been covering this now for so long. Tell me about your first reaction here in seeing Tyler Robinson sit down there, if you were able to see it, sitting down in this court hearing.
He was sitting down. It was via WebEx, so he wasn't physically in the courtroom, Kana, with the judge. But you could see that people were watching. You could see he was wearing this padded vest, and that's because he's been in what's called special watch in this jail here, which is essentially in isolation. He's being held to prevent him from harming himself or from others harming him. We heard from the prosecutor earlier today in his announcement of the charges that the suspect's mother had said that he was suicidal and that he wanted to kill himself, allegedly, instead of turning himself in. So you see him in that protective garb. The bulk of this hearing that we just saw was the judge reading the 7 charges. Of course, they are aggravated by the fact that the suspect allegedly committed this political assassination of Charlie Kirk in full view of children. So that's one of the things that has enhanced the charges against them, and one of the things that makes this a capital case, according to prosecutors here.
And I'm hoping we can just quickly go through some of those text messages that you mentioned there, again, with this roommate, with who prosecutors say that he was romantically involved with. And one thing they touched on in this hearing, too, Matt, is the fact that in this text message exchange, we're showing some of it, but Matt, they pointed out to the fact that they believe the shooter asked his roommate to delete the exchange and then to not speak with the media, and then it's shown in these charging documents, Matt.
Yeah, we have not seen these text messages. We have heard them for the first time from the prosecutor. They also put out this charging document in which these messages were revealed. And it appears to show this exchange between the suspect and his roommate, with whom he was romantically involved, apparently. And it's very, very detailed. And in the text messages, the prosecutor says that the suspect was talking about the murder weapon, talking about where he stashed it, talking about how he stashed it, and yes, allegedly advising his roommate to delete the messages and not to cooperate with law enforcement, to get a lawyer and not talk to the media if there's blows up, and eventually it did. What also struck me about these messages, at least initially, is that the suspect appeared to think that he could get away with this. He was hoping that he would never have to mention this to anyone ever again, and that they would never be able to find him. And it was only, as we've learned through these text messages presented by the prosecutor, when he realizes that he can't get back to that rifle that he stashed and take it somewhere else, and he realizes that police is right in that vicinity and he can't go get it, that he is in trouble. And that's when things start to spiral out of control for the suspect, according to these text messages. And at that point, he does appear, at least afterwards, to talk about being suicidal, not wanting to turn himself in. Eventually, he's convinced by his parents that he should not do any harm to himself and that he should do the right thing and turn himself in, Kana.
Right, and the prosecution revealing this was his grandfather's rifle. It was a very important piece of family property.
Right.
Matt Gutman, thank you, as always, for being here with us today. I also want to bring in our ABC News Washington, D.C. Bureau Managing Editor, Catherine Falders, for more on this. And Catherine, again, no real surprises here in this initial court appearance. I think everyone now marking their calendars here with September 29th to see what kind of counsel this alleged shooter does get ahead of time. Also notable, again, a protective order has been granted on behalf of Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk's wife, throughout this hearing. But Catherine, I think really the prosecution made a huge effort here to lay out as much of their case publicly as they could, and they made it very clear, Catherine, in this hearing that they are ready to give over all of this discovery to the defense, the state really making an effort to have their ducks in a row here ahead of this court appearance.
Yeah, exactly. You did hear them say that, all of that information that they've gathered that we've heard about, obviously, through the press conference earlier in these charging documents. There is a lot of evidence that they have. There's mountains of evidence that they have that we've learned through public documents like the one we received earlier, and also through our sourced reporting. We know they're doing forensics, for example, on the weapon that he used, which you just discussed a moment ago. So yes, they said that they are getting fascinating, Kana, to see him for the first time from sitting there from jail. He stated his name in that clip that you're playing where you hear him talking. That was him stating his name, Tyler James Robinson. And I noticed at some points when the judge said, I'm looking at my notes, but when the judge said to him that he was going to remain in custody without bail, you could see Robinson shake his head yes. When he said that he was going to read the charges, remember there's seven counts here, 6 felony counts. When he told Robinson he was going to read the counts, you could see him shake his head a little bit of movement there, but he hasn't said really anything else, of course, other than stating his name, and he will be provided an attorney. But I do think that it is quite striking to hear and see all of that evidence that it appears that the prosecutors have gathered. Looking at the charging documents again, we of course have been really focusing on those text messages that Robinson and his roommate exchanged. It appears they exchanged on the 10th, so shortly after the shooting. Now, it's unclear whether these are all of the text messages in the possession of prosecutors. We don't believe so. There's probably more, but those were quite striking to see.
So how does that coverage stack up with educating the public about what was going on during the initial court appearance?
Well, I think you can see he's trying to, in the beginning, lay out what occurred, and she actually stops him and says, I want to get to the text messages, and brings it up again and moves it there.
Right.
And implies again that stuff came out in the hearing. So it's kind of blended that sometimes it's mentioned in the charging documents, sometimes it's, the prosecution made an effort and implies in the hearing again, in just focusing on the evidence. It's not focusing much. I mean, that's like a 5-minute clip, and there's very little about what happened. It does mention what happened. I don't want to act like they didn't talk about that at all, but they blend quite a bit of evidentiary information in there, and at the end of the day.
And when you say evidentiary information, are you talking about incriminating evidentiary information?
That has not been determined to be admissible or anything, so, right. It's just, here's the text messages, and calling it a mountain of evidence and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, okay.
To thank all parties for being here, and
But also,
Did
you
you also
have a
look
very
at,
stoic.
How CNN was covering this initial appearance?
Yeah, this is the same hearing.
And your understanding is the person in the CNN clip is a former prosecutor who's CNN's chief, quote, legal analyst, right?
Yes, right.
Okay, let's take a look at that one. That's your next clip, 24, I believe.
But also, you have a very stoic defendant who I was looking to see any emotion that he might be displaying. Hearing that the death penalty may be requested for you is a very monumental, seismic moment. He had no reaction, nodding in essentially understanding alone. But then there was also a protective order that was asked for by the prosecution on behalf of Erica Kirk, the now widow of Charlie Kirk, that entails that there might be an element of fear that she is experiencing, or the thought that she wants no contact, either from him or anyone around him, that would make her feel more secure. Of course, she is a mother of 2 young children. You understand that. But here ultimately, you've got a speaking, essentially, indictment of sorts from the prosecutor earlier today, which laid out so much evidence. It's all allegations, the statements of counsel, not evidence in a court of law. But what can come in a court of law?
Yeah.
The statement to the defendant, including all these text messages.
Well, let's.
So according to CNN in this clip, the evidence that she hasn't looked at is admissible, right?
And again, mentions it was laid out today, implying that it was laid out in this hearing, and discusses his demeanor. He didn't react properly, according to her. His body language didn't, whatever the appropriate way to react is. So, you know, focusing on him, focusing on these text messages, calling them admissible, without ever.
And I notice in all three of these nationally broadcast clips, there's a real focus on the protective order. And tying that to Mrs. Kirk's fears, correct?
Yes.
How is that furthering the prosecution's narrative?
I mean, to me, it just goes to future dangerousness, impressions of the defendant. So we kind of talked about earlier, negative character evidence is prejudicial. And also we know from the research that pretrial publicity in fact affects verdicts and the perceived credibility of the defendant, likability and sympathy. So it kind of goes to that.
Okay, did you also look on that, for that court appearance, on what the local media was doing?
Yes.
Right. And before we turn to that, did you also look at how Fox 13 captioned the importance of the hearing on the 16th?
Right. So transcript reveals Robinson's alleged confession to shooting Kirk and messages to roommate with a screen capture of the court proceeding.
So the gist of what happened in court, according to Fox, is the confession?
That's what it implies, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, at the local level, did you look at this clip from
Following
KUTV?
Robinson's initial appearance in court today, we did speak with a body language expert who has been part of hundreds of high-profile criminal cases across the globe.
And some of the most compelling cases include Brian Koberger, Lori Vallow-Daybell, Casey Anthony, Karen Reed and Alec Baldwin, Scott Peterson, P. Diddy, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, Amber Heard, Prince Andrew, Nicholas Rossi, to prolific serial killers, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy. Tonight, Chief Investigative Reporter Wendy Halloran talked to Scott Rouse, who helped break down Tyler Robinson's body language. Wendy.
Well, Jamie and Mark, Scott Rouse dissected the nonverbal cues, analyzing gestures, expressions, and demeanor after Robinson learned prosecutors will seek the death penalty against him in the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Tyler James Robinson.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Robinson. I'm Judge Graff.
Tyler Robinson appearing virtually from the Utah County Jail in a suicide robe.
It's really odd behavior for someone who should be stressed in that situation.
Scott Rouse is a world-renowned behavior analyst and body language expert. He holds multiple certificates in advanced interrogation training and has trained alongside the FBI, Secret Service, U.S. military intelligence, and the Department of Defense. He serves as an expert consultant for law enforcement and the U.S. military, among others.
I'm going to tell you from my experience what I see going on here.
I asked him to analyze Robinson's demeanor.
No big, deep breaths. We saw a couple of breaths that weren't deep breaths, but they were breaths from just, it looked like they were almost from boredom. So that was a little bit odd as well.
Rouse says when he looks at people in situations like this,
Things like this, I look for the things that are missing, and those are all the things that are missing right out of the gate. And this is odd behavior for someone who theoretically should be fairly stressed at this point.
Rouse says it could be that he hasn't slept much.
Even though it doesn't look like a whole lot going on there, that's odd behavior for a situation like this. I've seen these 1,000 times where someone is being in the same situation, you're talking to them, and they've done something horrible. And they don't know what's going to happen next. They don't know what to expect. They don't know how to act during that. And this guy just looks relaxed.
Rouse recounted what facial expressions he would look for.
And you've got things called adapters where you try to get rid of built-up stress and tension. Don't see any of those. We see a little bit of clenching of the jaw, and his jaw goes over to his left. I think it's his left. And that's about it. In my opinion, he's pretty much resigned to whatever's going to happen is going to happen. There's nothing that tells us he's frustrated. There's nothing in his face from an expression perspective that tells that he's worried or frustrated or angry or anything.
Rouse says there were no jerky, tense body movements, and he meticulously watched his eyes.
We can't see his blink rate very well. The blink rate tells us if someone is concerned or thinking about something or is stressed about something, because your blink rate goes up a lot. Because the normal human will blink about 15, 20 times a minute. And from what I could tell, it was a low blink rate because I was catching maybe 10 times a minute. It wasn't a whole lot. So I think from an emotional standpoint, he's given up.
Now, Rouse said if Robinson was concerned about something, his eyebrows would raise. He says he didn't see that happen at all in this hearing. Mark?
All right, interesting. Wendy, thank you.
What stands out to you about this kind of coverage?
Well, now we're completely speculating with sensational conjecture because he didn't blink properly and his eyebrows didn't go up enough or whatever it is. And now it's creating this impression that this person has no emotion or empathy, like he might fit like I think later it becomes a sociopath, and we all heard the story of they have no emotion and all that. And this is all based off of him watching a WebEx for a couple seconds and just making these ridiculous statements because he's the body language expert now. So he can now make an assessment from this hearing that he didn't respond properly because he's, quote, given up or whatever he said. And this is all, obviously, none of this is informative, and it's all speculation and sensationalism.
And by the way, you're aware of the fact that the court has moved the camera from the front of the courtroom to the back,
Yes.
right? And moving it to the back, does that still allow some room for these so-called body experts to maybe analyze how his shoulder was tilted?
If his jaw doesn't move
Too
right,
much
or controlling if somebody turns around for a second, I mean, it's a courtroom, things happen over time. So the fact that anytime there's a movement, it might spur some ridiculous story about somebody's nonverbal language is incorrect, is personally, I think is pretty sensational and ridiculous.
Okay.
Following Robinson's initial.
Now, did you also take a look at the September 29th hearing?
Yes.
And what was your understanding of what actually took place at that hearing?
So this was primarily, from what I remember, it was appointment of counsel in this hearing.
It's called the waiver hearing. You got on your slide waiver hearing, appointment of counsel. And again, Mr. Robinson is appearing on WebEx at that
Right.
hearing.
So it hasn't been in the courtroom yet, still
So
WebEx.
was it your understanding at that appearance, counsel got appointed?
Yes.
Essentially. All right. So how was that covered, first of all, by Court TV? And before I show you the slide, are you endorsing the criticism that Court TV in the slide makes against the court and the prosecutor?
I'm sorry, endorsing what?
Are you endorsing the criticism that in the slide of the court and the prosecutor?
No, that's just what was said by one of the commentators.
What were you trying to assess in looking at this slide, what the perception of the public is to the in-court proceedings?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's commentary that falls on the sensational side, right? So now it's these people are pandering to the camera, and it's creating a performative experience. So it's turning into like outside the courtroom, like a reality TV show in a sense. Like, I don't like what this person said or that person said. So not informative as to what's happening, but it's sensationalism, and it's just the kind of thing you want to avoid.
So let me play this for you, and then I'll ask a question about
TV
it.
Live, Matt Johnson alongside my friend Kelly Craft in Today for Ted and Julia. Busy day here. Let's begin this hour in the state of Utah, where the suspect in the Charlie Kirk assassination is due back in court today.
22-year-old Tyler Robinson is accused of murdering the conservative activist during a rally that was held at Utah Valley University. This took place earlier this month.
Robinson is expected to appear via Zoom during that hearing alongside his newly appointed defense attorney, where we're likely going to hear a discussion as to whether or not they want to schedule a preliminary hearing.
While we wait for that hearing to begin, let's go ahead and take a look at a backgrounder on this case. This is Court TV affiliate KSTU with a closer look at the suspect, Tyler Robinson.
Robinson had confessed to them or implied that he had committed the incident.
From his apartment to his family's home, the FBI and police combed every inch of Tyler Robinson's life, his family expressing to law enforcement that he had become more political in the last few years.
Robinson mentioned Charlie Kirk was coming to UVU. They talked about why they didn't like him and the viewpoints that he had. The family member also stated Kirk was full of hate and spreading hate.
Why don't we go ahead and bring in our guest this hour to discuss as we wait for that court appearance to begin out there in Utah. Joining us now from Los Angeles, California, former Deputy Public Defender for LA County, Philip Dubé. Philip, nice to see you on this Monday.
Your Honor, we appreciate the court's comments with respect to Your Honor's role in this case. In like matter, we commit to approach this case with integrity, with professionalism and civility. We are truth seekers. We will aggressively pursue the truth in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, counsel, unless there's anything else, thank you for being here. This court is in recess.
All right, and that concludes that hearing. Philip, let's go ahead and bring you in on this.
The only criticism I have was that those closing words about how we're all here to seek justice, like the warriors of justice. Attorneys and judges don't speak that way in open court. It's presumed that everybody will act with integrity, with honor, and to articulate it on the record, in my opinion, is pandering to the cameras.
All right, Philip, so
You're familiar that one of the criticisms of the court coverage in the O.J. Simpson case was that everybody, including the judge, was pandering to the camera. You familiar with that?
Yes.
And this guy from L.A., he's probably familiar with that case. He's accusing the court and the prosecutor of pandering to the camera. And then the first part of the video, where they refer to the backgrounder, are you familiar with what's referenced there?
Yeah, again, it's kind of going into the background stuff again about evidence and then jumping in while they're waiting and so on, and then jumping into that comment.
And who is giving the backgrounder there? What the clip is of Governor Cox, is it not?
Yes, the governor. No.
Okay.
Yeah, reading another press conference.
So that's a sort of an incriminating narrative. And then the second part of it is, what is the perception of the public to the court proceedings being televised? And at least according to what Court TV is putting out there.
Oh, that it's a show. It's pandering to the camera.
Pandering to the cameras.
Yeah.
Does that further the reputation of the judiciary, or does it detract from it?
Is it what?
Does it further the reputation of the judiciary, or does it detract from it when the perception is right or wrong? And I'm not in any way endorsing what he's saying, but in terms of what's getting put out there to the public.
I think it creates pressure on everybody to have cameras in here, from the jury to everyone involved. I think this is a very high-profile case, probably one of the more high-profile ones I've ever been involved in. I think there's pressure on the prosecutor, the jury, everybody involved in this case. There are a lot of people watching, including very, the executive branch, everybody's involved. So I think just those comments and everything else is just pressure to me.
But those kind of comments, like a comment that a prosecutor is pandering to the camera, if that gets to prospective jurors, and that prospective juror is sitting in court as a juror and is asked to evaluate the arguments of a lawyer, and he or she already has a preconception that, oh, this is a guy or this is a court that is pandering to the camera, what does that do to the reliability of the fact-finding?
I'm just gonna, it is what it is. I don't have anything else to say about it.
to be live, Matt Johnson alongside my friend Kelly.
What was, on the September 29th, what was CNN's sort of capsule of what the hearing was about, the appointment of counsel hearing? What was their headline?
Yeah, so confessions, DNA, and his grandfather's rifle. This is the evidence so far on the Charlie Kirk shooting suspect.
What did confessions and DNA have to do with what was happening in court on the 29th?
Nothing. And again, this is just, in every hearing and everything you see, it triggers the same information and the implication that this stuff is part of the hearing. So people aren't necessarily watching the live stream. A lot of times in these courts, you're watching the coverage of the live stream, not the live stream itself. Like in the survey, not a lot of people, it's like 25% watch the live stream, but people are seeing this stuff on TV, and this is what the media coverage is. So it's not showing the live stream, it's screen captures, it's like a short summary of what happened, and then going into this information and the perception that this was evidence presented in the hearing when it was not.
And the substance of it, confessions, DNA.
Exactly.
Is sending a message, is it not?
Yes.
Now, is this, again, on the December 11th court appearance, I want to ask you how Fox News covered it, and with one of their talking heads
Just add
here.
to our comments about his demeanor in court earlier. We talked a little bit about don't try to understand the mind of a monster. Well, we do know a little bit about the mind of this monster in that I believe he's incredibly proud of his handiwork. It makes us think a lot about Luigi Mangione. These two men inscribed notes on the bullet casings that they used to commit murders, murders that were to send a message. He committed an assassination in a very public place against a person that he had ideological differences with, entirely politically motivated. That is a person who's proud of their handiwork. So I think that when we see him loose and calm, relaxed, and smiling in court, I think that's an outer manifestation of his inner feelings, that he is very proud of what he's done, stands by what he's done, has no remorse for what he's done, and is looking forward to the world watching.
Jonathan, I see you nodding in agreement.
Really troubling.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, as Josh put out. When you have cases of this kind, you are off the map. You are where monsters dwell, to use pirate terms. This is where you find monsters, are in these cases. And you find people that don't think the way you do. This is one of the reasons jurors often stare at defendants whenever they can get away without being impolite. They look at these defendants to try to figure out something not just about them, but themselves. How can someone go off the map to this degree? The evidence here is overwhelming. And a lot of attention is likely to be what possesses a person like this to treat someone like Kirk as a trophy. And that is what happened.
Well, if it's true that he did it and he gets convicted of it, I guess you could say that, you know, he thought in his own twisted mind that it was something that he needed to do, and you could never understand, as you were pointing out earlier, Professor, you know, Trey was pointing out, you know, the person who drowns their children and the person who bludgeons someone to death, you could just never get inside that mind to even begin to understand what's going on.
Is it your understanding?
That's right. I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, that does it for us here.
You're understanding the first commentator, the first talking head there is an ex-prosecutor, right? And is he sounding like a prosecutor talking about the, you know, the mind of a monster?
I mean, to me, it's more sensationalism. First of all, again, negative character evidence is some of the most prejudicial pretrial publicity that you can have, emotional, negative character evidence, particularly in death penalty case. And you're hearing mind of a monster, he's a trophy. I mean, he's smiling. Like, what is the basis of any of this? Like, there's nothing from that hearing or anything that is relevant here. Like, this is just pure speculation and sensationalism.
Now, the second speaker, the guy who chimes in and says, yeah, this is, you know, the evidence is overwhelming. At this point in time, had any evidence been disclosed to anybody, either in the court hearing or, as far as you know, any place else?
The only thing we've had is a press conference with the charging document.
So the second guy, a law professor from Georgetown in Washington, what would have been the basis for him commenting that there's, you know, all kinds of evidence here, agreeing that we're dealing with monsters? What is the factual basis for that?
I guess from the charging document.
Okay.
Just add to our comments about.
Now, did you also take a look on that same date of the Fox coverage? And this is from the ex-FBI agent. Is there a talking head here?
Yeah, and the sociopath stuff feeds into what we've heard earlier.
Well, my first reaction is looking into the courtroom and seeing what's happening. Again, talking about Robinson, it's disgusting. He's a true sociopath. It's someone who has absolutely no empathy. They have no remorse. They have no conscience. He killed somebody. He doesn't care. He's smiling. But again, that's not going to serve well. You know, when the trial comes to pass and the death penalty is on the table, again, jurors will not be okay with that. The other thing that I think is very important to understand is that working with these victims, I know myself when I was an FBI agent, I wanted a victim-centered approach. Erica Kirk and those in her surrounding sphere, her family, her loved ones, Turning Point family, they are the victims of this. And frankly, the American people who have had to watch this absolute catastrophic tragedy and evil live on television. I mean, it's disgusting, it's heinous, but she has a right to know. And I do think it's very important in this process that you are working closely with the victim, and I assure you that they are. She deserves to know what is going to happen. She didn't wake up one day and become a legal expert and a law enforcement expert. She is the victim of this most heinous crime. And again, God bless her, God bless her family, and I do appreciate that there are people that will step up to the line and will hold her hand and walk her through this process, as that is what she deserves. There's several other things that come to my mind in this trial, but it does come down to the judge's decision. But the conspiracy theories are despicable, they are disgusting, and you are profiting off of someone who has been murdered. And that is wrong, that is sick. And if you think that you're helping justice to be served, you are wrong. You are doing no favors for the prosecution team. There are solid law enforcement officers on these investigations. Trust that they are doing the right thing for the right reason. Look, I come from the FBI. I understand why people are in a position where they do not always trust the criminal justice system because of things that we have seen in our country. But rest assured, on this investigation, no stone will be left unturned. All eyes are on this, and there will be no mistakes made. And so please do not take the liberty to go and make up and fill in the gaps where you do not have answers. It is inappropriate. You are not helping things. You are making things worse. And if you want justice to be served, you need to let the process work the way that it should and stop putting these lies into people's minds, because you are hurting people, and most of all, you are hurting Erica Kirk, her family, and her loved ones. It is unacceptable. It cannot be tolerated. And anyone that has a clear conscience about making money and creating clickbait, that is sick.
Yeah,
Now, what about that segment educates the public about what was happening in court on December 11th?
Yeah, clearly it's not, and it's in the backdrop of, you see just, in the corner of the courtroom, but it's just, again, an opinion and a diatribe basically about, there will be no mistakes, no stone will be left unturned, and that the prosecutor's doing everything correctly, and so on, so.
Does the literature tell us anything about what impact it has in terms of who the person speaking is? Like, this is an FBI agent, ex-FBI agent. So do people listen? Does research say anything about that?
It's just like a source credibility question. Law enforcement, people know who she is. It's not always the case that a stranger is seen as credible, but definitely when you hear more prominent people saying it, absolutely. And just you think about how people passively consume information. So you're not really, when you have this on, you're not necessarily highly critical of what's being said. It's passive consumption of news. So you're not questioning the source per se or thinking, well, this is maybe not appropriate. None of the evidence has been presented yet. It's editorial masked as news, basically.
I notice in this clip, she's critiquing the conspiracy folks from trying to profit from their commercial ventures.
Yeah.
And as she's making this critique, you notice the advertisements running on the side of the video. You get a loan for a car loan.
Yeah.
4.99%.
It's an ad because it's online. There's an ad there for sure. So they're monetized. Is that the point? That they're monetizing it? Sure.
Right. Is that typical of the coverage you're seeing here? In other words, especially on the social media, if you go to social media and try and pull up these clips, you get the clips, but you get a lot more, don't you?
Yeah, you're always going to get ads on social media. That's how they make money. Are you asking about more like in terms of how, like what surfaces and what becomes viral, or?
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
That's a separate issue. Okay. This is I'm going to skip that
And accused
one.
of assassinating right-wing political activist Charlie Kirk is.
Was there also at the December 11th hearing quite a bit of focus on the tie that Mr. Robinson was wearing?
Right. So to me, the thing that stands out is you could see the impact of some of this stuff that's irrelevant. So there was a reference to his tie, and it was like trans tie, and then a pro-trans tie, whatever that is, and that becomes a search term. So people want to know more about that, or just following his court appearances and so on. So people are more engaged, they're actively searching, which is different from passive consumption.
Okay.
And just to be clear, there was an increase, I don't know what the numbers were before, but yeah, there was a significant increase in those searches.
And Mr. Burt, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to give you 45 minutes remaining.
Somebody just passed me a note.
All right, good deal. Thank you.
I got it. Thank you.
And the country, even the world, watching as Charlie Kirk's accused assassin made his first in-person court appearance today.
Is this another segment from our body language expert?
Yes.
Where he talks about he didn't see any grief muscle?
Yes, so
What is a
apparently.
grief muscle?
Do I know what a grief muscle is? I don't know. So apparently, the grief muscle wasn't functioning properly to imply grief by looking at the clip.
So, and that was the focus of the coverage? It wasn't who got appointed, who the lawyers are, what the next procedural step is, whether he was showing a grief muscle?
Right. So again, we're just back to this conjecture of, well, nothing interesting happened in this hearing, so let's find something interesting to talk about. And it's staring at the defendant and making an assessment of what he's thinking or whether he has grief for what he did based off of his grief muscle, whether it was, I don't know if it was not doing the right thing. I don't know.
Okay. Was there also in this hearing sort of a focus on what a high level of security was necessary to manage Mr. Robinson?
Yes.
And the local KT,
New video showing what we believe is Tyler Robinson's police escort leaving the courthouse in Provo just in the last hour. Robinson accused of murdering Charlie Kirk during an appearance at Utah Valley University back in September. Thanks.
and what kind of message is that sending to prospective jurors?
Well, I think in a case like this, like I could see it creates anxiety among prospective jurors. Like this is dangerous potentially. Like there's always pressure, you know, on a high profile case in terms of juror serving, and then adding cameras to the courtroom, risk of somebody being disclosed as who they are. And then you have, you know, news stories about SWAT teams and all these things just to kind of at the courthouse. I mean,
And how about the inference here that Mr. Robinson has to be transported in a SWAT vehicle?
Sure, I mean.
In terms of his dangerousness.
I think it's just the nature of this case, of the danger of it.
Okay, we're going to skip that. And I want to ask you, did the court coverage then cause responses that sort of are connected with a court appearance? And in this case, you have the court appearance on the 11th, and then 2 days after, is there sort of a responsive appearance by Mrs. Kirk to the events that happened in court regarding whether the defendant should have discovery or not?
Right, yeah.
So was this coverage on December 13th a nationally televised town hall?
It is, on CBS.
Let me play you just a little segment of that, and I have a question.
What is going on? Why are there so many conspiracies spreading about what seems to be a pretty open and shut case?
This is the first time that we have seen evil on display where we have social media at our fingertips. Something so evil that happened, people are wanting answers immediately. They are wanting to figure out how to wrap their mind around this. Egyptian planes.
Egyptian Do planes. you believe that Tyler Robinson murdered your husband?
Yes, I do.
Why do you think it is so hard for so many people to believe that reality?
Because it's too simple. Again, everyone always has to think there's more to the story. Well, sometimes there's not. I've seen the autopsy report. I've seen our case pulled together. I've been in constant contact with our lawyers, the prosecuting team. I've seen it all. And let me tell you this. Why in the world, why should we, prior to the trial, lay all of our hands and cards on the table for the defense team to see, to somehow then, I don't even know what they would do with it. But what I will say, and I want to get on the Egyptian plane thing, we'll take a flight on that for a second. What I will say is what I'm worried about, and I'm fascinated, just from a legal standpoint, to see how the United Healthcare trial pans out. And I say that because this is the first time where we are seeing the implications.
You're talking about Luigi Mangione.
Correct. I prefer never to say any of their names. They do not even deserve the ounce of oxygen and breath out of my body. But what I mean is it's fascinating to see how social media will impact that court case, just how it might impact mine.
Are you nervous he's not going to get a fair trial?
I'm nervous that there could be, they'll say we can't find a fair jury. Like they're going to taint the jury pool. And in that case,
That's how widespread you think these conspiracies have gone.
Yes.
That's how mainstream they become. Okay, Egyptian planes?
So one of your categories was inadmissible evidence, right? And I know you're not a lawyer, but you're generally familiar with, there are certain things in a penalty phase of a capital case that a victim impact witness can say and certain things they can't say, right?
Sure.
Like you can't express opinions about the defendant, as an example. Why is this sort of coverage prejudicial in relation to her commenting on court appearances and whether Mr. Robinson should have the benefit of discovery and her opinion about guilt and the narrator's opinion about the evidence being overwhelming?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot there. I think, one, obviously, there's a lot of empathy for the victim's family, and I think that's very appropriate. So she's a credible source, I would say. I think it's not ideal to have a victim saying that due process shouldn't be complied with, the idea of discovery, and why are we sharing, exchanging information, which is the way that due process works. And then the references, I've seen the evidence, I know, it's an open and shut case, essentially commenting that he's guilty and the evidence suggests that, would definitely be prejudicial and create a presumption of guilt among prospective jurors. So it's kind of like, a lot of that, I think the thing about the conspiracy theories, which are, this is not the first time, I mean, if you look at like the DePape case, where, David DePape attacked Paul Pelosi, trying to kidnap Nancy Pelosi, and Elon Musk was spreading rumors about his relationship with the victim and implying they had all that. So it's definitely not the first time. It's unfortunate it happens, but it happens a lot.
Okay. Now, you have many more examples in these clips of similar things,
Yes.
right? The basic point being, we're not getting information about the court proceedings, educating the public about how the law works, but we're getting a lot of opinions going to the issue of whether Mr. Robinson is guilty or not.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this was triggered by the court hearing. I mean, I get it was in the sense that she's commenting on what happened.
Right.
Yeah, so, sure.
So I want to talk to you about and we're going to skip the other examples because we're running out of time here. Let's talk about your survey.
Okay.
So walk us through that. First of all, what was the methodology of the survey?
Sure. So again, this isn't a change of venue survey, but it follows the standard practices put forth in the ASTC, American Society of Trial Consultant Professional Standards. So we're using a random digit dial technique. Everybody has a known chance of being selected. So it's not a text message sampling approach or email or anything like that. It's phone calls, cell primarily.
This is its focus exclusively on Utah County.
Yeah. So they have to be jury eligible. So they have to either be registered to vote in Utah County or have a driver's license with a Utah County address on it to be included. And then the survey is designed for, initially, you're just capturing general impressions of the criminal justice system to get people familiar with the study. And then we're going, for this one, it's case awareness, like we would do typically, case recognition, prejudgment, just to get a feel of what's the baseline, where we at today in terms of that question, a fixed opinion question. I call it like a presumption of guilt question. Would the defendant have a difficult time convincing you that he's not guilty? So it puts the burden of proof on the defendant. And then where their source of information is, like is it getting it from local news, social media, national news, things like that. And then a couple basic recognition items, how they watched streaming, which was probably, if I did another survey, I probably wouldn't ask it that way, because I think based on what we saw, like people aren't per se seeing streaming of the hearings, it's the commentary and post-hearing stuff that's really coming out from that. Whether they knew about a confession, I think it's probably better text messages, because that's primarily what we're talking about, and a few other things. So capture that.
What were the key findings of the survey?
Yeah, so high level, so the recognition rate is pretty much everyone, 99%. This is based off a sample size. It's a smaller sample. Again, this is just a snapshot of 200, not the typical 400 that we would do like in a change of venue survey. And then guilt was high, so 64% believe that he's guilty of murder based off of what they've read, seen, or heard about the case. Only people that answer that question are those who know about the case. the 3 people that didn't know about it didn't answer that. Only 7% reported that he's not guilty. That fixed opinion question, you can see over 50% already believe that the defendant would have a difficult time convincing them that he's not guilty. And 35% believe he should be sentenced to death at this point. And 65% have a somewhat or very negative opinion of the defendant, which fits into all that negative character evidence that we just walked through for the last.
So based on the results of this, would you conclude that there's been so much publicity in this case that it doesn't matter whether we get any more because the jury is already, or the jury pool has already been so tainted that adding more to it is really not going to change the equation?
So the idea is Utah County's so saturated that you can't get a fair trial here, so just
Right.
play
At this
more
point,
coverage?
it's so saturated, the court should do nothing to try and control the publicity and, because it's basically a done deal.
Well, a couple things. One, there's also a lot of media coverage coming out of this in Salt Lake City, which would be the largest county, which is where you would typically move it to. So then what you're saying is, well, there's so much coverage here, let's just have a free flow of sensational, prejudicial media coverage. And then down the line, when it's time for a change of venue, you can say, well, there's nowhere to move it because Salt Lake City's just as bad. So I guess you're sorry. So there's that as my first reaction to it. And then I think, look, this is the baseline of where we're at. So you still have, like for the death penalty question, it's only 35%. You're not seeing above that 50% mark yet. We don't know, a lot of it, a big one is case knowledge. So you might find that recognition rates are high here, and I'm sure they're high in Salt Lake City and everywhere else, but it doesn't mean people identify with the case, went to the university, have personal connections, know all the case-specific facts. We don't know any of that yet.
So in your survey, only 35% of those polled indicated that Tyler Robinson should be sentenced to death if he's convicted?
At this point, yes.
And in terms of whether he was guilty or not, you've got 64%.
Right.
Okay. What else about the survey?
So as you'd expect, people are following the case, so people are following it somewhat or very closely. Sometimes in big counties, those numbers are lower because you'd expect in big counties there's so much else going on that it takes a lot for a case to capture people's attention, unlike smaller communities where they're shocked and they follow it very closely. Kind of back to the Koberger case in Idaho. And then you can see everyone's talking about it. So 96% reported that they are talking about the case or they've heard others talking about it in person or online, which also suggests that the big county is taking on characteristics of a smaller community. And you, in terms of source, so 53% are getting the news about this case from social media, and we kind of skipped that, but there's a lot of sensational stuff that's being created and clips and reels and inflammatory comments and screen captures from these hearings with comments on them as well. And then people have seen something on social media about this case, 69%. And then they've seen something on YouTube, 34%. And then 45% have seen something about the case on local television as well.
Okay. What does this slide show?
Yeah, so just high level, again, this case is capturing this community's attention. Despite the size of the county, 99% recognition rate. That's very, very, very high. I don't see that very often. And they're following it somewhat or very closely already, and nothing's really happened yet. We haven't had a preliminary hearing. We haven't had the big things happen. We've had pretty procedural-esque hearings about, counsel in terms of gag orders and things like that, and they're already following it closely before the really sensational stuff starts coming out.
Okay. I think this is summary of what you've already said, correct?
Yeah.
So you mentioned this before, but in terms of where people are getting their information from, are they picking this case up from watching live stream or through other sources?
They are not. So if you go back to the prior slide, which is from the survey, this is specifically about the case. They're picking it up from social media, local television. Those are the big ones. They're not watching the live streams. And I think it was like 25% said they've seen like a clip or part of the live stream, but they're seeing news footage on local TV, which we already went through, that has prejudicial commentary about these hearings, whether it's the body language expert or the lip reader or any of this stuff. You know, all that stuff is coming out in those sources, and that's what they're saying.
Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop here. I hate to do it, but I have to.